All right, so we are going to begin a new topic today, topic 5, World War I in the 1920s. So we have a lot to get into, so we're going to break this up into a few different parts. But as always, be on the lookout for these key terms, everything from the Western Front to the bull market, buying on margin, presidents like Herbert Hoover, etc. Babe Ruth, Charles Lindbergh, who were the flappers, the KKK, the Volstead Act, all kinds of interesting things here. And then can you do these things? Can you identify the causes of World War I? Can you analyze reasons behind isolationism and neutrality in the United States prior to 1917? Can you explain why the U.S. entered the conflict on the side of the Allies? Analyze how the U.S. government mobilized the public to support the war effort? Describe the issues raised by President Wilson's 14 points? Analyze the decisions made at the Paris Peace Conference and included in the Treaty of Versailles. Describe the economic problems faced in America after World War I. Analyze the consumer revolution in the bull market of the 1920s. Analyze how the policies of Presidents Harding and Coolidge encouraged economic growth and prosperity in the 1920s. Compare economic and cultural life in rural America to that in urban America. Analyze how foreign events after World War I and nativism contributed to the Red Scare. Describe how increased leisure time and technological innovations led to a widespread shared popular culture in the 1920s. Analyze how the Great Migration and the philosophies of Marcus Garvey affected African Americans in the 1920s. Trace the development of jazz and its impact on American society and the rest of the world. Discuss the themes explored by writers and artists of the Harlem Renaissance. World War I. World War I begins in July of 1914 and it ends in November of 1918. At the end of World War I, nearly 8 million will be dead and more than 22 million wounded. You can see a map of Europe before and after. So the top right is what it looks like before. The bottom left is what it looks like after. So you can really see how things change. Even the alliances shift throughout the course of the war. In 1914, so that's sort of where we end up. So how do we get there? Nationalism, militarism, imperialism, and entangling alliances combine with other factors to lead the nations of Europe into a brutal war. The war quickly spread around the globe. The United States remained neutral at first, but ended up abandoning its long tradition of staying out of European conflicts. So this is another map of Europe before World War I. Based on this map, what can you predict about where the major battles of World War I will be fought? Okay, look at the top there where it says mania. This is an easy way for you to remember the causes of World War I. Mania, militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and assassination. So if somebody says, what caused World War I? You say mania. The first letter there is M for militarism. European countries are fearful that as they start to expand, there will be conflict, right? And so they all start to amass weapons. They start to build up a strong military and prepare for war. They start to quickly manufacture and acquire more weapons and also deadlier weapons. And if you look at the map in the bottom left, you can see that little red territory, the Alsace-Lorraine, which is a disputed territory between France and Germany and had often changed hands. And so that piece of territory will bear watching as the war goes on. With the rise of German manufacturers, Germany was able to gain advantage in the production of heavy arms prior to World War I. Machine guns are an example of advanced military technology used in World War I. Long-range artillery guns also caused devastating casualties. New weapons, machine guns, poison gas, U-boats, and biplanes. And this is a map of chemical weapons, chemical warfare used in World War I. Tear gases, chlorine gas, phosgene gas, and mustard gas. The date that it was used, who first used it, what it does, the effects. So these are all examples of new technologies. Speaking of militarism, what's the military strength of the country as of 1914? Which nation had the largest navy at the beginning of World War I? Which had the most troops? So alliances is the first A in Mania. The Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente both exist prior to the start of World War I. You had Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire as part of the Triple Alliance, and then the Triple Entente is France, Russia, and Great Britain. Now, those names will change. The Allies, the Triple Entente will be known as the Allies. So there's that. Everything was in place for a great conflict: nationalist ambitions, large armies, stockpiles of weapons, alliances in the military. The nations of Europe were hurtling like giant trains toward a great collision. Archduke Francis Ferdinand's assassination was the incident that triggered the conflict. And we will be talking about that. But there's a little chart for you: the Allied powers, the Central Powers, and then who's neutral. Nationalism. Nationalism is a desire to promote your own culture and interest, often at the expense of other cultures and interests. The idea is that people with the same ethnic origins, political ideals, and language had the right to form sovereign states. And so you start to see a lot of these small regional groups breaking away from big regional empires like Austria-Hungary and forming independent states. Imperialism, scramble for empire in order to bolster growing economies. And so this is really what's going to make it a world war, right? Instead of just a European war, because these powers are also colonial powers. And so then when fighting happens, you have fighting not just in Europe, but in other places as well. And then the sort of last piece of the puzzle, the most immediate cause of World War I, is the assassination. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he's killed by a member. His name is Gavrilo Princip. He's a member of a terrorist group called the Black Hand, which was based in Serbia. They were aimed at creating a larger Serbia by helping small areas of the Austro-Hungarian Empire gain independence. And they used violence. And the plot is actually discovered by Franz Ferdinand's security team, and so they reroute him. It just so happens, because there was going to be a bomb that went off, but it just so happens that they reroute him right past the assassin, and so he ends up being killed, and he and his wife are shot to death on June 28th, 1914, and it's sort of going to be the spark that ignites the war.
Austria-Hungary and Germany were allied against the other great power bloc, Russia and France. War between Austria and Serbia would mean war between Austria and Russia. That would mean war between Russia and Germany. That would mean war between Germany and France. And that might mean war between Germany and Britain. Over a few days in early August 1914, the nations of Europe fell into war. August the 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. August the 3rd, Germany declared war on France, deciding to invade her old enemy through the neutral country of Belgium. The Germans faced the problem of a war on two fronts. In the east against Russia, and in the west against France. Some years before war broke out, they had devised a plan to deal with this, the Schlieffen Plan. It was a brave gamble. They calculated that Russia would be slow to get its forces together, so this would give them a few weeks to defeat France. They would attack through Belgium to avoid French defences, and be in Paris in 3 weeks. That way France would be defeated, and they could turn all their forces to deal with the huge Russian army. The Germans didn't expect Britain to get involved. Britain had a treaty to protect Belgium, but this was signed way back in 1839. The Kaiser didn't think Britain would go to war over a scrap of paper. In any case, compared to Germany, he felt Britain had a contemptibly little army.
Oh, sorry, I did not enlarge that for you. So as the war spreads in Europe, President Woodrow Wilson called for Americans to be impartial in thought as well as action. And a melting pot nation that tried to make Americans of peoples from diverse origins, Wilson did not want to see the war set Americans against one another. At first, most Americans viewed the conflict as a distant European quarrel for land and influence. Unless the nation's interests were directly threatened, Americans wanted no part of it. They preferred to maintain what they viewed as traditional American isolation from European disputes. Still, many Americans felt that the war's effects and did I skip a line? No, I did not. Many Americans felt the war's effects and few were truly impartial in thought. Most held a preference for one or another combatant, and many businesses benefited from the increased demand by warring nations for American goods. Now, America has a long tradition of avoidance of European conflicts. That's true. But remember, America is not completely isolated. Although Wilson is moving the nation more into isolationism, Roosevelt and Taft had engaged in European imperialism, both big stick diplomacy and dollar diplomacy. Also, there is not a completely answered question about who America would have joined in the side of. Of course, we know that America and Britain are incredibly close allies, so it was a bit of an inevitability that if America joined the war, it would be on the side of the British. But remember, this is not World War II. Germany is not always seen as a villain in this scenario. So this is a little bit of a recap of that video that I played. What happens? How do the dominoes fall? So first we have Austria blaming Serbia and declaring war on Serbia on July 28th of 1914. That's the assassination. Germany pledges support to Austria. Russia pledges support for Serbia and mobilizes its army. Germany declares war on Russia in response. France pledges to support Russia. Germany declares war on France. Germany invades Belgium on the way to France. It's called the Schlieffen Plan. Great Britain declares war on Germany for invading Belgium. And again, the Schlieffen Plan. The idea is that if Germany can get in quickly into France, take France, then it could avoid a two-front war. Of course, we know that doesn't happen for Germany. Again, here are the combatants, how it will shake out, the Central Powers versus the Allied powers. And of course, it says at the very bottom, the U.S. will join on the side of the Allies in 1917. To be continued.